Great. So, yeah, thanks all for being here. For those who don't know me, I'm Adam Graham. I'm founder of Grey Matters, a new business consultancy for agencies, and also BD Matters, which is a community where it's designed that no one in new business feels isolated. It's a place where new biz professionals come together to learn, support, and grow with one another. And so today we're here to talk all about pitching. Pitching, as we know, is one of the most exciting parts of our industry. It's an intense period where all sort of strategic commercial thinking and creative thinking comes together to solve huge challenges and beat the competition. And I, for one, have been involved in hundreds of pitches in my career, small to global, all sectors, all disciplines, and learning a lot about the world in the process. But as we know, pitches also come with a bit of a sacrifice. And that winning often puts a strain on our resources, mental health, our profits, the environment, and it can come at a cost. But worse than that, when pitching is a bad experience or unnecessary, it can have quite a detrimental effect on our people and our industry. So obviously, when we saw the pitch positive pledge by ISBA and the IPA, we were really excited. You know, it aims to highlight some of these issues, helps to guide both brands and agencies on how they can improve the pitching process to minimize or reduce those negative costs. So we've had about 280 agencies who have now signed the pledge, but we're asking, now what? You know, we don't want this to be a bunch of silent signatories on a forgotten website. We want to see real change in the industry. And throughout my whole career, I've seen the poor briefs, I've seen the burnout, I've seen the wastage. And so it's great to see, you know, so many of you here today who want to do something about it and decide what comes next. So I've got a great panel and I've got the great pleasure of introducing them. So I've got Julian Douglas, President of the IPA. I've got Jim Rothney, who's Regional Growth Director for Europe and UK of the McCann World Group. Russell Oakley, Managing Director and co-founder of the Go Network, and Anna Stone, who is Global New Business Director at Ogilvy. So yeah, if you guys could just do a quick intro, I'll start in the order I went in with you, Julian, and then we'll jump into questions.
Thanks, Adam. Hello, everybody. My name's Julian Douglas. My day job, I'm the Vice Chair and International Chief Executive at VCCP, and I've also got the privilege of being President of the IPA, and I was one of the architects of the Pitch Positive Pledge.
Thanks, Julian. Jim?
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. I can see there's a few friendly faces in the audience today, which is great to see some old friends. Jim Rothney, Regional Growth Director at McCann World Group. Spent the last 13 years in growth roles across UK, Europe and global. And I'm probably one of those people who spent my last 13 years being told by clients, you're the only person who's objected to that. So this is an area that I'm hugely passionate about in terms of how we get better pitches and better outcomes.
Thanks, Jim. Anna?
I'm Anna Stone. Nice to see you all. I work at Ogilvy as a Global New Business Director. I have a complete history of new business. I started at a cold calling agency and have kept going through agency side. So pitching is really the only thing I know how to do, which is why this is a great conversation. Now in my global role, I look after partly global pitches, but also our community of new business people across all Ogilvy's offices. So anything that also involves building a community and empowering people to say no and be like Jim, I'm also really interested in.
Great, thanks, Anna. And Russell?
Thanks, Adam. Good afternoon. I'm Russell Oakley, so I'm MD and co-founder of Go. We're an intermediary based in Manchester. Our tagline as a business is raising the bar of brand agency relationships. So we run anywhere between sort of 40 and 60 briefs a month. So a lot of experience, obviously pitches going on all day, every day. Prior to launching Go, my background is agency side. So I was in the business development teams and business development director for something like 5-6 agencies down in London. So I have experience of obviously being on that side of the fence as well and pitching those agencies in. Positive Pitch Pledge fits very, very neatly with our business model. So yeah, delighted to be here.
Cool, thanks guys. So yeah, so got a lot of experience on the panel. So let's dive in. and I think one of my biggest questions, I think when I saw the Pitch Positive pledge was, how can we make it, we believe in making it a more positive experience, but how can we ensure it has more teeth? And I think we'll kick off with you, Julian, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question. It's a crucial question. I mean, the two crucial questions are, how does it have teeth and how does it endure? I think the first thing I'd say, I think it does have teeth, and where they come, it comes from the fact it's truly cross-industry. So we started from a place of positivity here, even though we're trying to tackle something that can be negative, the wastage, the negative impacts, negative outcomes for people and environment, and the waste of money that a lot of pitching is. But we couched it very much in the positive on purpose, because first of all, there are lots of great pitching behaviors out there. There are lots of advertisers who do run positive processes. There's lots of intermediaries who do, but obviously there's lots who don't. The fact that it's truly cross-industry, and ISBA were absolutely just as much a driving force as the IPA. That's what gives it credibility. That's what gives it teeth, because the teeth really come from reminding everybody involved in the agency selection process of commitments they've already made. And that might be in their ESG reports, that might be in the annual reports, it might be in just the values of the company. So I think it does have teeth when applied properly. The task, and we'll probably delve into that, is making sure people are aware of it. But really what we're trying to do is, instead of it being, we did workshops with advertisers, with agencies, with intermediaries, with procurement. We didn't set out to do a new how to pitch guide, because we know how to pitch. We didn't try to set out to do a new kite mark, which are the rules of pitching that people would try and get round. We're trying to improve, we're trying to raise the bar on best practice, and we're having something that people live up to. People make a commitment to this. So I do think it has teeth. We just need to make sure people know about it.
Yeah, great. And obviously today, that's what partly today is about, and talking about it more is only going to help things, and sharing good experiences. I mean, Jim, you've obviously had your fair share of pitches, and received a lot of poor briefs, I'm sure, and maybe been involved in some poor processes. But I guess from your experience, you talk about saying no in certain instances, and how we can push back, and sometimes it's educating those brands on the other side, whether it's naivety or whatever it might be that's causing those problems. How do you kind of instill those better processes and potentially turn away pitches if they don't seem right?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. That's a really good question. I'll start with a caveat, and then I'll try and answer it very, very directly. I think the caveat is the problem doesn't actually exist with the sorts of large brands that are members of ISBA, that have already signed the pledge, that already understand agencies. I think when we see challenges generally, it's those tier 2 or tier 3 clients, those slightly smaller clients who've still got potentially significant budgets, but perhaps don't have the same level of experience in their teams of working with agencies. So I think that's caveat one. It tends to be the second and third tier clients. I think the second caveat is that 99 times out of 100, it's not malicious or devious. It's just naive. And I think, and it's naivety born out of a number of things. But in terms of what you can do to shape that process and influence and push back, I think there's three things you can do. I think the first thing is get a fix on their level of understanding. So for example, if there's not a budget in the pitch, get a sense, do they even understand what it costs an agency to pitch? So I think that's the first thing, is kind of where's their level of understanding at? I think the second thing is, if you are pushing back and if you are wanting to change things, reason it through the lens of the benefits to them rather than the issues to you. So for example, if the time schedule is unreasonable, flip it back and turn around to them and say, I assume you want to see our best people on this, our best talent. Because if you do, we might actually need another couple of days to allow us to do that. Because at the end of the day, why do you want to come to a meeting with us where we're potentially putting up suboptimal talent just to meet a deadline? And I think the third thing is you flip the argument. So for example, put the client in your shoes. And the best example I can give of that is, if there's no budget, you can escalate. You can say, So, okay, I can see from last year you spent 10 million on media. Would it be fair to assume that the creative fees for this might be around 1 million? You know, and you generally can start to get a sense, but if they're not playing, you can then sort of press the button that says, do you have any idea what it costs an agency to pitch? And when they say no, and you tell them, they're generally surprised and horrified. And then you basically say to them, so you're asking me to go to my CEO to make a business case that sees us potentially invest 50, 100, 150,000 pounds at the time, plus hard costs, depending on the size of the pitch. And I can't tell my CEO what the size of the prize is. Would you do that to your CEO? And at that point, you generally start to get to where you want to. And the final thing I'd say is if there's an intermediary involved, use them, because they're invaluable in helping navigate and negotiate difficult situations. So there's three things: you know, get a fix on their understanding, work from the benefits perspective, and flip the argument.
Yeah, no, really useful, examples. And I think it's that nervousness that agencies have to do that. Either they get too bogged down in the process, or they just feel we're going to lose the pitch if we push back, and it's sometimes, I think, putting those brands too high on a pedestal. They're the prize to be won, and we'll do anything subservient to win that. And I think the balance is completely wrong from the offset. And yeah, often I've worked with agencies, it's about increasing their confidence, pushing back. Actually, people have more respect for you when you do set those boundaries and you set those ways of working, for the future, rather than sort of agreeing now and think what that's going to lead to in terms of the dynamic and the balance in that relationship. So Anna, you've obviously got a lot of experience in pitching, like me, your whole career sort of around it. What, from your experiences, why do you think this bad behavior kind of creeps in from the side of the brands, and how can we better educate them on what's happening behind the scenes in agencies like Ogilvy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, bad behavior definitely exists on both sides, would be the first thing I'd say. Let's not make it the brand's fault. I don't know, I'm interested in the audience. Do we have brands and clients here, or most people agency side?
I'd say if there's any brands, maybe take yourself off mute and shout.
Or give us a wave, just so we know. It's interesting to know who we're talking to. Okay, so it looks like this is
the agency side. I believe there were a few brands, but I don't know if they're here.
Fair. Okay, so I think that there's two things you've touched on one bit, Jim, in the naivety and the lack of experience. Don't forget that just because I've been in more pitches than I can remember, that everybody else around you has, even in the agency or on the client side. There's no reason to believe anybody's ever run a pitch before, or ever run a pitch at that scale, or ever run a pitch in that area. So, that's why asking questions is so key. I mean, I think agency side, bad behavior, it comes from us being enthusiastic, competitive salespeople, right? It comes from wanting to win. It comes from the belief that if we do more and can cram more into every single second that we've got, we'll do a better job, which just isn't necessarily true. I think one question I've always challenged in the agencies I've worked at is said, okay, if our deadline is the 5th of October, what would happen if we stopped working on the 3rd of October? And everybody looks at you aghast, like, well, we've wasted 2 days. And you go, okay, well, what if the client rang us and said the deadline's the 3rd of October? Well, we'd finish by the 3rd of October, wouldn't we? So why don't we set our own deadlines and our own ways of doing things to iron out some of that behavior? And I think you've touched on it. Transparency, open communication is key. I've refused for years to do any pitches where there is no conversation with the client at any point, because I don't think that's reflective of what a good working relationship is going to be. And again, as you say, push back. I would love to tell clients what happens in agency minds during pitches, that when we ask to push something back a day, we're fearful that you're going to hate us and throw us out of the pitch because we're not showing you enough love, that we don't really value the business because we've asked for one more day. That's what's going through our minds. Whereas so often, when you have that conversation, as Jim says, it turns out other people are humans too, and they have holidays, kids' birthdays. It's really interesting working on global pitches as well, because I spend half of my time telling people that actually that's a holiday in the country they've asked to pitch. So do they really want people to pitch on that day, you know, to which most people have that reaction and go, oh no, of course not, we didn't expect them to work on that day. There you go. So I think it's very it's about rethinking the way we approach things, and I think that's why the pledge is as important in getting signatories as it is in opening discussions on these things. And I think that's where the big clients and the big agencies really have a role to play in setting the example, because we're not all perfect by any stretch, but by having those conversations openly, it enables other people, empowers other people to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think it's all about that consideration and that human side really that comes into it, doesn't it? To understand that we're all people behind the scenes, you know, with the same challenges and same problems. Cool. So then bringing in you, Russell, obviously, you know, you come at it from the intermediary side. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this. And often, you know, when an agency receives a brief and a pitch through an intermediary, it's always much more warmly received, I'd say, because you know you've got this kind of boundary or this facilitator that's going to help you. You know it's going to be well guided. You know there's going to be some structure to it. So what can be the role of the intermediaries in trying to ensure the brands and agencies, you know, follow best practice and make the experience more positive?
No problems. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's nice to hear that briefs from intermediaries are well received most of the time. First and foremost, our role is to ensure that the brand client gets the best possible agency for their needs, whether that's in terms of their ability to answer the challenge and actually meet the brief and deliver the work, but also quite importantly, or just as importantly to a degree, is best fit in terms of their ambitions, their culture, their values, their ways of working. Just in terms of our aim always is to not just make sure that the brief is answered and an agency is appointed, but that leads to a long and hopefully healthy relationship between the brand and agency for as long as possible. Our role in terms of the pitch process, and when the pitch positive pledge came out, it not far off word for word mirrored our sort of values as a business in terms of ensuring that we met fairness and transparency on both sides. So for us as a business, first and foremost, and it's already been said by Jim and Anna, is ensuring transparency and the expectations are honest from the brand side and are realistic, I guess, from the brand side. So we spend a lot of time doing our due diligence in terms of understanding that this is a brief that's real, that it's actually there is going to be an agency appointed, and we set to their expectations around what what their budget should be, what they're likely to see in the pitch, what they're likely to hear, the timescales that they're setting, so that we're trying to remove that stress and pressure of the pitch situation and the pitch process right from the off to make it as enjoyable as possible, to be honest. We share scoring templates. You know, we ask them to consider those. We ask them to obviously adjust and amend them as they see fit, but to use those within the process. So again, so that they're considering fairness throughout, and it's not just a subjective decision that they come to. In terms of the agency side, I think probably the most important sort of goal for us is that we, as an intermediary, share as much information and make the process, as I say, enjoyable, transparent, and fair, but that we are agnostic and unbiased, so that those, you know, every agency in every pitch that we run is on the same terms. In terms of commercials, every agency is given the same amount of information, and obviously, where possible, is the same amount of time to prepare for ultimately the pitch situation. In terms of qualification, I think that's key, the qualification for a brief. So every agency that we approach about any of the briefs that we run, we as a business have quite strict pre-qualification criteria against pretty much every brief that we run anyway, so as to ensure that we're not wasting any agency's time. But also we put that onus onto the agencies and ask them to make sure that, you know, they aren't fudging it, if you like, so that it makes it look like they're going to be a good fit for this brief, when realistically, and we're very honest about this, it's going to be a competitive landscape, and only the agencies who really meet this pre-qualification criteria need apply, if you like, and trying not to waste anyone's time. From there, our aim throughout it in terms of actually running the pitch, as I say, is to make it as stress-free and enjoyable and ultimately as valuable a process as possible for everyone involved. And that obviously means making sure meetings are diarised as far as advanced as possible, making sure the agency knows who they'll be meeting, making sure agendas are set and everyone's sort of clear in terms of what they're going into and what they should prepare. It means giving full detailed feedback along the way for every agency wherever possible. Most of the time brands will agree to that up front and will, you know, right from the off sign up to where they need to be and when, so we're not messing agencies around with meetings being moved around or stakeholders not being able to make those meetings. And ultimately in pretty much 99% of the briefs we run, there can only be one winner, and therefore it's understanding that and understanding that every agency puts in a lot of effort to every pitch pretty much, and understanding that there needs to be value along the way, even if ultimately you aren't the appointed agency. And I think detailed feedback for that is crucial, whether they win or lose, so that they can take some value out of their involvement. And then right up to almost past verbal appointment, if you like, ensuring that we're on hand to smooth the process into the contracts, into legal procurements involvement, so that the relationship does actually get off the ground and gets off to the best possible start.
Mm. Yeah, exactly, and that's where, you know, I say the intermediaries are invaluable in this process. And yeah, you talked there about sort of feedback, and I think, you know, we've all had our fair experience of ghosting, and I think there's nothing more frustrating when we just don't get anything back from the client at all. You know, I've talked a lot about that, and yeah, very frustrating, but all good practice I think we can all take, and learnings that we can take. So I guess we're looking, you know, at the pledge, you know, Julian, I'm thinking, you know, how is it intended to be used? Like, what and how should we be using it in the eyes of the IPA?
Well, I think Jim mentioned this in his piece, that this is a tool. It's a pledge, it's a commitment, but really the way it's meant to be used, it's a tool that gives you it gives confidence to the in fact, really, it should educate the advertisers who are calling pitches, and it should give confidence to the agencies to respond in the right way, to make an informed decision. So I think in my experience, and I've worked at many agencies, I've done many pitches, I think Anna said it, there's this desire to compete, but also to please, to win the business at all costs. And there's definitely a sense I see amongst people in new biz departments to not want to do anything that they feel might cost them the business. And often it's against requests that were unwittingly made, that requests that have implications that haven't been considered. So, you know, I agree with Jim's point. This isn't going to root out bad agents who knowingly behave badly. This is about raising the overall practice of people who don't know better or unaware of what goes on behind the scenes. So my single biggest ask of everyone today, whatever level you are in your new biz team, whether you're running it or you're junior into it, is when a lead comes in, the most important thing is to ask the question, is this a positive pitch? Is this pitch under the pitch positive pledge? And I've been very happy to hear, we're doing a survey at the moment that will be going out to all the agencies and advertisers and intermediaries this week, to get some more hard evidence behind this. But anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of pitches that are now coming through the logo on, which is good. But the vast majority won't. We only launched it a few months ago, and it's not like we had a massive media spend. So for me, the most important thing to do, the way to use it, is to ask the question, is this a positive pitch? Is this under pitch positive pledge? Because at a minimum, it drives the right conversations. I mean, I would argue, if it's by an advertiser who signed the pledge, I would expect to see the logo on there. And if it's through an intermediary who signed the pledge, and I can tell you pretty much every intermediary signed the pledge, I'd expect to see the logo on there. So the whole point of this, you know, Jim, Anna, Zav Reese is quite vocal on this. A lot of people who are agencies that are either successful enough or have the confidence to push back on requests they don't think are reasonable. But the majority, I would wager, of people don't, because for fear of breaking rank and not winning the business. The point of having this pledge is that you can literally go, this is are you aware of this? Have you signed this? And then when they go, no, never heard of it, you can go, well, it's really simple. I'm sure there's nothing you disagree with. We just want to know, why are you pitching? Can you give us a written rationale? If you do need to pitch, can you run a positive process where we care about the people involved, both sides? And can we make sure you get a resolution? That just drives the conversation where you get, and the fact it's got ISBA and IPA on it means your individual agency isn't at risk, because this is signed off by the best brands in the business. Unilever have signed this, Barclays have signed this, Google have signed this. So for me, the point of it and how I think it will work, it's a tool that drives those conversations in a safe way, where you don't lose you don't start 10 meters back by asking your intermediary, you've signed this commitment, is this pitch one of those? Because it really should be.
Yeah, great. And I think it's like you said, it's about raising that awareness, and the more people we can get this in front of. And I'm interested, if anyone on the call today, or anyone's got any other ideas of how we do that. I was thinking about email signatures, putting it like on websites. Is there a section on all the agency websites that allude to this?
Just a point to follow up on that. Once we get the survey results back in, and Joyce will be helping on the agency side, and Abby at ISBA with the intermediaries and the advertisers, I think it's really important that we share the positive stories that are out there, because we're not trying to catch people out. We're trying to raise standards up to the high levels that are Unilever. This is an easy sign for Unilever, because they run really positive processes. So we're trying to say to show to other people and highlight and showcase, this is how you run a positive agency selection process. So I would be hoping to get testimonials that we can push out through LinkedIn, we can push out on social media. So it becomes a badge of honor.
Yeah.
A bit like AdNet Zero, you want to be a company that produces its advertising in a sustainable way. Similarly, if you're an agency or an advertiser, you want to run your agency selection in a sustainable way.
Yeah, it's not all about the negative. And I want to come on to some maybe good examples of pitching practice that you guys have seen. But just going to you, Russell, I'm thinking about, the briefs, and, it might be also interesting to know sort of common pitfalls or problems that you see that when these initial pitches start. Things like budgets is obviously a constant bugbear of agencies and brands, very reluctant to sort of share that. Should that be a mandate that all of them have? And interested if there's any other kind of common problems you're seeing in the pitch process that you're trying to educate brands and agencies on at the moment.
I think in terms of the budget being a mandate, it depends how we define a brief. So at Go, we have 3 classifications of a brief. The first one is that we are confident as an intermediary that this brief, we've done all our due diligence and this brief is going to happen, i.e. they are going to appoint an agency where we've spoken to the key stakeholders and decision makers, and all the information that we're getting back from them is that yes, they need an intermediary, they need an agency in place, and the brief has been put together very much with a very realistic understanding of what they can expect and the budget that they have to spend with that agency, be it on a project or retained basis. The first version of that for us is a Go exclusive brief. So we know that we are running that exclusively, and that all the agencies involved will be going through the same process as run by us as an intermediary, or supported by us as an intermediary. The second tier down from that is exactly the same, only with the caveat that there are agencies outside of our process as an intermediary that are involved. So either we've got to the table slightly too late, so they've met with a couple of agencies already, but then seen the value in using intermediary and they've invited us to bring agencies to the table, or the incumbents involved and they don't feel comfortable putting the incumbent through the intermediary process. We pass that risk on to agencies. We're very transparent that that's the situation, i.e. there's a brief on the table here, but just to make you aware, there are other agencies involved. And obviously then it's for you to decide whether that's something you're comfortable with or it puts you off as an agency. both of those first two that I've explained there, we do not class as a brief unless they have a budget against them. So we wouldn't put any of those out as a brief unless the budget is we are comfortable the budget has been signed off and it's realistic, and we've been through sort of, as I say, all our due diligence. Our third category of brief is what we sort of very easily term just a brand challenge internally, and that is whereby we've spoken to a client who has identified a challenge, a marketing challenge within their business, where they are pretty comfortable and confident that there is an agency solution for it, but at this stage they haven't committed to definitely appointing an agency, nor have they got the experience or potential understanding of what a realistic budget would be for that challenge and how to solve it. And again, we're just very transparent with the agencies that this of those three categories, that this is a brand challenge. The budget hasn't been signed off. Obviously, the amount of work, therefore, by us as an intermediary that goes into that is lower, but and the number of agencies we speak to about that brand challenge is probably lower, but it still means that it's worth an introduction to educate that client. And the typical outcome of those sort of intro meetings, where it is a challenge, not a brief, tends to be, okay, yeah, that's given us food for thought, and we are now we're ready to run this as a brief. Or in exceptional circumstances, they'll just appoint that one agency that they've met, that we've made an introduction through. So in terms of it being a mandate, ultimately it's up to the brand and the experience and education of the brand client for them to be able to put a budget against that, but we certainly push for it in every call we have here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that a lot of that comes down to qualification, right? And that's sort of some of the things that we coach agencies on is how to qualify these opportunities. And I think, you know, if you don't have a qualification process, you should have one in place, you know, looking at the various criteria, like budget being one of them, but, you know, lots of other things, you know, whether it's the right cultural fit for your agency, you know, whether you've got the resources to pitch, looking at the gaps. So like there's so many different things that can go into sort of how you qualify those opportunities, and score them as to sort of whether you should go for them or not. And I guess to you, Jim, then, like, I guess at times, and I think what's frustrating is that we see pitches where we shouldn't. There doesn't need to be a pitch necessarily, where, you know, often there's these statutory pitches come round, or you feel people are in a pitch process, but how can we actually avoid pitching, you know, if necessary, you know, or work out whether or not a pitch should go ahead?
That's a brilliant question that kind of builds on so much that we've heard. Before I answer that directly, Adam, I'd just like to try and thread together a couple of points that Dougie and Anna have both made around agency behaviours, in terms of that desperation to win, that desperation to please, and that fear of being discounted if you don't comply. Is anyone can win business. Winning business is easy. Winning profitable and sustainable business that leads to long-term relationships, brilliant work that your people are proud to work on, you know, takes real effort. And, you know, one of the things to almost ask yourselves when you're in that maelstrom is, as I say, you know, the familiarity of a relationship rarely improves behaviours. So if you're kind of not getting great behaviours at the start of the pitch, guess what? If you win the business, there's probably above average probability that that's not going to be the most harmonious of relationships. You know, if there's not that kind of sense of give and take and collaboration and desire to find the best possible partner and be flexible to do so, you know, there should be some early warning signals going up, regardless of your selection criteria. So I just wanted to kind of thread that together, because I think that's really, really important. It's almost a case of knowing when to say no is more important than knowing when to say yes. But in terms of how you can avoid the pitches, which was your question, I think there's three things. I think the first thing is relationship, and that is a two-way street with your client. You know, it's about being proactive. It's about nurturing that relationship. It's about understanding what the needs are. It's about, you know, if you can see an up-and-coming need or potential issue, intercepting it beforehand. I think the second thing is honesty. And again, that goes both ways. You know, build in a feedback process with the client so you can intercept those problems early. And if the client is giving you feedback about your performance, you should use that to basically create the level playing field that allows you to say to the client, and this is where things could be so much better if you did this instead of that. And these are all things that help mitigate the chances. Because at the end of the day, most clients don't want the pitch either. It's got to be, something's got to have gone wrong, or there's got to be an unmet need, because the client is going to commit to a huge amount of time to run a good pitch process. And do they really want to do that? No, they probably don't in a lot of cases, unless the relationship is broken. And I guess then my third point is, it sounds simple to say, communicate and don't screw up. Sounds simple, I know, but I mean, I guess, Dougie, you're the commensurate client man par excellence. I don't know whether you've got anything you want to build on that, because that's my simple new business person's view.
You make a couple of absolutely bang on points. I wish I was the commensurate account man, but I think what you called out there is so true. The way this initiative came around wasn't starting with pitching. This whole initiative between us and ISBA came around about better, sustainable, enduring client-agency relationships, and especially with a view to the mental health of people on both sides. And we figured the best way to get a good relationship is to make sure it starts in the right way. So you absolutely call that out so correctly and accurately there, Jim. You start as you mean to go on in any relationship, so that should be exactly the same in this instance.
Yeah, great. No, I completely agree. And I think, yeah, it's just getting into that pitch process. I think whenever I've guiding an agency and they do receive a brief, I would sort of approach it with some skepticism, but to a certain extent, and just kind of understand, like, why has this pitch, come around? Like, why are you deciding to pitch right now? And often, the agencies, once you understand the real reason and the motivation behind the pitch, well, it could possibly, push that pitch away, a pitch that might be a waste of time or something you're not going to win, but also it might help you win that pitch, because you'll truly understand the motivations and what beneath it.
Or it can change the nature of it. Because I think one thing that was really useful, the first workshop I did with Andrew Loudon from ISBA was with the advertisers. And so I started out IPA president from an agency point of view, going, we need to, there's lockdown, a lot of mental health issues in everyone's business. Let's get after this. And I was like, look, we don't have good people sat on the bench, sat around to pitch. And one of the advertisers said, neither do we. And it was the first time I really thought about it through their lens, which is why this is a shared responsibility. It's not bad clients, good agencies. It's collective as an industry. It's a huge amount of pressure on the people who run a pitch, a client, especially if they don't use an intermediary. So when you couch it that way, and then, I recently did a conversation with about 25, 30 procurement leads at ISBA, their compact group. When you frame it as a shared responsibility and go, what's the scale of the project that you're making a selection on? So what sort of task would be proportionate to make your decision? You can end up with a different shaped pitch. We'll still call it a pitch because it's competitive, but that might not be a full-blown creative, fully worked out media pitch. That might be a chemistry with a strategic question. It can start to bring different shapes, and a good intermediary will do that. But I guess for those projects where there isn't an intermediary, I think that the idea behind this is to try and to ask the questions that get to proportionate selection techniques.
Yeah, and is there any, I'm just interested in, the panel here, has anyone seen some very good examples or new examples of pitching practice that they've seen? I've heard of the sort of Mothers Pitch It Forward initiative that I'm aware. I don't know the inner details, but I believe it's about giving profits towards good causes, from new business that they win. But is there anything else that we've seen that we could share, more positive examples of pitching where it's been done correctly?
I think we've got a couple of ways we're using the pledge to drive that. So we are, back to sort of Dougie's question, we check every pitch that comes in now, whether they've signed the pledge or not, to see if they're aware of it. And when we're asking about who's involved in the pitch and the client that's involved and the people that are involved, if they're not very experienced pitching, then we are sending them the pledge. So that's those are two things that we're actually doing to make sure it's working. I think another story I was thinking about when you asked this question, which it's a positive story of a bad practice perhaps, but I thought you might enjoy, working with an intermediary recently who I'd not worked with before. And I pushed back on something which I'm not scared to do. That's not true. I'm always scared to push back on things and put my head above the parapet, but I do it anyway because it's really important. It never gets less scary. And I went back to the intermediary and said, look, this thing that we're being asked to do, this isn't going to work. This isn't on. And I had the most transparent conversation I've ever had with an intermediary, because I said, look, I'll be honest, I don't think this is right. I do want to push back, but I'm very aware we're down to the last 2 agencies. And if I push back and the other agency doesn't, what's going to happen? And he sat with me and he went, look, I've spoken to the other agency. If I'm honest, they haven't been quite as vocal as you, but I think you're right. So I'm going to present to the client that both of you think that this is not right and see what happens. Anyway, we went back to the client. It was a regional pitch. The client had very little idea of what their individual markets had asked us to do, so was not aware of what was going on. And the client equally came back and went, actually, it's really good you said that, because the intermediary has said it and because the agencies have said it, that allows me to go back to my markets, and it's not coming from me either. It's coming from somebody else. So it's a collective voice that really, really worked in that example.
Yeah, great. And it opened that conversation that needed to be had.
That is bang on. I'm so happy to hear that, Anna, because that's what we're trying to do with this. This is it's the industry coming together to raise practices. It takes it away from the individuals. So that's really heartening to hear.
I could maybe build on Anna's point. I mean, that's a brilliant story, and I think we should think about, when we are pushing back, we're not doing it to be difficult or we're doing it to be obstructive. We're doing it to try and ensure that the client gets a good outcome and gets what they actually need. And in many ways, the act of pushing back, so long as it's framed in the right context, demonstrates that you're a commercially savvy organization that's making considered decisions. And if you think about when you get to that stage where, if you are one of the appointed ones and you're going into procurement discussions, you've already done yourself a massive favor, because you've set the bar in terms of you're not going to roll over on everything, because you've created some reference points. So I think that's really, really important in terms of having confidence when you are pushing back, is to think of it through that lens that, we're not doing it to be difficult. We're doing it to try and get you to a really, really good solution. So you actually buy something that's the thing that you want. I think it's under good examples. I've been fortunate this last year to see a number of good examples, which again play to Anna's point about working on a lot of international pitches. We've had 3 or 4 through the summer going on across various geographies, where the client has said, we're going to put that key meeting back to September because we know that half of your people will be away. So that it's starting to get through with clients, and that's just so enlightened, rather than just trying to hammer you into a meeting in August where you can't put your A team out and you probably can't even field a B team if you're lucky, particularly in Europe. It's just so refreshing that clients are starting to get it. And I think, we should applaud and celebrate it when it happens.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just going to ask you about stress and burnout and things like that, because do they exist? I don't know. I guess I've seen quite a fair bit of that in my time. And I think it's really important, with the community around with BD Matters, that we support that. We notice that, it can feel quite isolating, and new business roles, it can feel relentless, I would say, is the word I think we'd all use when it's back to back to back. Like, just practically, what could or should we be doing as new business directors, as agency leaders, to monitor this and try and avoid, burnouts?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that. One is about planning, but I think the other one comes back to sort of something we've just been talking about this idea of saying no. I think for a long time, a lot of new business people have been quite open about the fact that we can say no to pitches if we really don't think we're the best agency, or that we really don't think we're going to win. What I think is new is saying no because actually we can't win it right now, because we've got too many pitches happening, we've got too much else, we've got a load of big client projects happening. And I think 2 interesting things happen sometimes when you say no. We've said no and gone, actually, we've got a lot of big client launches going on at the moment, and people go, oh, you like your existing clients, that's good, okay. And sometimes they come back and go, well, do you know what? We need to sort this by the end of the year. We don't need to do it in the next month. We really want you to pitch. We'll move the pitch back a month. Is that okay? And you go, happy days. Now I think I'm in the lead of this pitch, already going in. So I think there's a new bit of saying no and being realistic. Your people have to be one of your qualification criteria. It's not just about the pitch. It's about what you've got available to win this pitch right now. But I think the other thing, as I touched on, is about planning, project planning. We all have in our agencies people who manage client projects every single day. If you're a bigger agency, you might have project planners. If you're smaller, it might be your account people, but we all have these people. And yet suddenly when a pitch goes out the window, we think a much better way of running it would be to just set everybody running in different directions and see what they come up with in 2 weeks' time. If we just put back in, and it's a bit processy, but a bit of process around having a plan, going, okay, we've got 2 weeks, 2 months, however long for this pitch. Who do we need? Who do we need when? Making sure everybody's really aware of what their role is in this pitch, what their responsibility is in this pitch, having a tight team, but who bring in other people as needed is, absolutely crucial. But as much as anything, being realistic. And again, this is another place you can have the conversation with the client. If you get a brief that says, I want a full creative solution and I'm giving you 3 weeks, is that realistic? Is that right? Are you, to Jim's point, putting your best foot forward? Go back and ask and set the expectations. And you will always run that risk that if you say, no, we're not going to give you a full creative solution, we're going to get X far, someone else might bring a whole creative solution, somebody else might win it. But again, you're setting up for the right kind of relationship. And if it was only 3 weeks, you've only lost 3 weeks. It's not so bad. So I think planning is really key, and really thinking about what you can do when, what your people can do when. Start at the beginning of your pitch process, ask your pitch team, do any of them have any holiday booked in the pitch time? To which the answer is not, can you cancel it? The answer is, okay, therefore, can we use you on this? Can we cover in that time? Do we have to say no? It's back to being open and transparent again, but being realistic, I think, is really key to stopping that burnout. And setting, as new business leaders, it's really important for us to set the example, to have those conversations, to turn around in pitch sometimes and say, do you know what, actually, I'm going to the theatre tonight. I'm doing something else, whatever, not be, it's no good for us or the rest of the pitch team, us being in the office until midnight every night. That's not going to achieve anything or set the right example. So we've got to be realistic for ourselves and set that example as well.
Yeah, the new business people just want to know that that's supported and that you've got their back, and that is going to come first. They are going to be listened to. I think obviously, like bringing in you, Russell, in terms of like a lot of people around pitching, we work with all sorts of size of agencies, and some refuse to pitch at all. Some will refuse to pitch creative work because they just won't want to give that away. And then often it comes up around, is there a pitching fee? Can we get anything back for this? I mean, it's very rare in my experiences. Do you think that should fit as part of the process? How do you see that come up often in some of the conversations you're having?
In terms of how often we see it coming up, no, it is pretty rare. What I would say, we feel our responsibility as an intermediary on this matter is that we try and take a sort of an external view of how much are we asking the agency to do here in terms of the work involved, and then B, ultimately, is this what will be involved in the pitch? Is it specific to the output and the end campaign? So and how much within that is the brand or the client going to take from this pitch? So if for example, in terms of fairness, all 3 agencies at the final stage of a pitch are going to present creative ideas or insights or whatever it might be, that is ultimately going to be of real value to the brand and the client. From whichever agency presents those, ultimately they'll probably only be appointing one. Then that's what prompts us to certainly have that conversation with the brand and say, look, in terms of fairness, have you considered this? In terms of the amount of work, as I say, that you're going to be asking the agencies to do, and the fact that some of this work, most of it, will be original and insight and valuable to you as a client, whether you appoint them or not, there is an argument to suggest that a fee, and again, we advise in terms of whether that's a percentage of the overall budget for the brief, or it's a nominal fee, but a one-off fee for being involved throughout the size and scale of a brief, that this tends to be a conversation around. So yeah, I would say ultimately then it is the prerogative of the client and of the stakeholders. Most, from my experience, I would say, haven't considered it going into that conversation, and that us bringing it up prompts that conversation. It's rarely met with a blank no, but obviously it tends to be a conversation around, okay, what's the justification of us paying, and ultimately where's that money going to come from? So I would say it's our responsibility as an intermediary to have having that conversation more and more where it's applicable to the criteria I've just discussed.
But yeah, but I like that fact that it's part of the conversation to make everyone aware of like the investment that actually goes into this process, and I think that's that level of transparency.
It's fairness again. It's trying to remove this master and slave mentality that seems to sometimes exist in our industry. That we just try and challenge or encourage the brand to put themselves in the agency's shoes. Most are very empathetic with that, i.e. how much work is going to be put in, and they're very grateful for that from agencies that are unsuccessful. But ultimately that only goes so far, right? So that's where we then try and prompt, okay, well, there's obviously amount of time and effort that's going into this, and that costs money. Is it worth considering putting a fee against that?
Yeah.
Could I, Adam, could I maybe offer a quick build on one of the things that Russell touched on there? And that's, sometimes we get elongated pitch processes, and you start off with an exam question, as I'll call it, which they use to determine who might be the most suitable people. And sometimes these processes get elongated, and you suddenly find that you're in danger of actually not providing the answer to the exam question, but actually being asked to provide the answer to the client's problem as if you were working with them. And I've had a number of occasions where that's been the direction of travel, and we flagged it, and we've put a value on that work to say, look, this has changed through the process. You're actually buying a campaign. If you work with us, that's got a value of X on it, and we're going to want to negotiate that into the commercial agreement. And we've had success with that on a number of occasions where the client has agreed to pay because they've realized you're effectively solving their business problem, or proving that you can go a sufficient way that you could solve it. And that has monetary value to it. So having that conversation about putting a value on it, I don't think does any harm whatsoever. And I've had a handful of cases where the client has agreed to that, appointed us, and then paid for that idea.
I have an example, sorry to dive in, I have an example of one actually just last week where a very, very well-known brand suggested to us, it was a creative pitch. Ultimately, they had seen near enough to appoint the agency, but not quite enough that they felt complete confidence. And it was them who proactively said, look, it is down to one agency. If it's not that agency, it's not going to be any of the agencies we've met, but we need them to take it 2 or 3 steps on from where they have taken it. But in order to do that, we're now going beyond the realms of what we'd actually asked in the original brief in terms of being able to appoint them, and therefore we'd like to suggest a fee. The caveat was that ultimately, and it has come to the right conclusion for everyone involved, that fee would then be worked from the original budget and taken from that original budget.
Yeah, interesting conversations there around sort of the value of creativity and what we're bringing right to the table. So obviously, if anyone's got any burning questions, by the way, we'll see if we've got time to ask them. Please put them in the chat, and if not, we can follow up with the guys at a later stage. I just wanted to then think about like what next. We've only got a few minutes left on the call, and I've got a quick poll I want to push out as well to everyone on the call. There's around sort of 280 signatories, I think, to the Pitch Positive pledge, but obviously we've got tens of thousands of agencies in the UK. So, is there, I don't know, from the IPA perspective, is there an aim for this? Is there a target? And what's the plan to sort of maybe open the debate up to that? We talked about the tier 2 and how we need to reach some of those brands that aren't maybe aware of some of these best practices. How can we, what's in plan to keep the conversation going and continue to sort of change the industry?
Is there a specific target? No, we've been happy with the traction so far. We want to continue to build, so it just becomes how progressive companies do business, I guess. What I want to see coming out of it really is, as we've said today, 1, everyone on this call, everyone in new business, when a pitch comes in, ask, is it a positive pitch? And because that'll lead to good conversations. My second one is, remember the commitment that you're making as an agency to the people in your team. Make sure the work you do is proportionate to the prize. As Jim's saying, charge if it gets more. Third one, really, for keeping it going, when you win, or arguably even lose, if you want to be really magnanimous, it would be very good to push out through your feeds, through your LinkedIn, through your social feeds, a testimonial saying this was a positive process. I'm sure your intermediary would love to see that. And I'm sure the advertiser would love to see that. But we're trying to establish a new benchmark of best practice. So it's very important to talk about it. So that's what I want to see.
Yeah, great. We can all get social and posting a lot more and celebrating some of those. There's a question from Duncan. I'll launch the poll, and then I don't know if maybe Jim or Anna or Russell, you want to jump in about the viewer pitching when the incumbent agency is involved. I don't know who wants to take that.
Indeed, I think it depends entirely on whether the brand will tell you the reason for the pitch still, because that answers it completely. If the reason is that they're not sure if the incumbent has the capability, if they're working to something new, then that might be worth the conversation. If it's because there's something they're not happy with about the incumbent, still depends a bit on what that might be, because obviously the incumbent's going to do it, give it their all. Then maybe. If the answer is because somebody told me I had to have a pitch, that's very different. So I think you can, if you're getting the transparency right at the beginning as to why the incumbent is involved and why the pitch is happening, then you make a decision based on that.
Yeah, it's just building on that. There was a stat, I think it came from the AAR, and I think it was last year around 40% of repitches returned to the incumbent, which is good news if you're the incumbent, because you do actually have a reasonable, just under 50-50 chance. Perhaps sometimes not so good news if you're not, but it's all about doing your homework and understanding the why. And let's face it, it's a small industry we work in, and it's not hard to get to the bottom of it with a few phone calls. So.
Cool. Okay, a quick one for Julian there. Is there any plans with public sector clients? Do you plan to push it out to the public sector?
I mean, what we've found so far, and what our plan is to almost go by vertical. So I guess the answer is yes, but what we found, once Barclays signed it, we found lots of other financial services signed it, because it then became, you don't want to be the one who doesn't. So we're working our way through, with ISBA's help, the different verticals. I think we're doing the pharmaceutical industry next.
Okay, great. So just in terms of the poll then, I mean, let's talk about, so 64% of people on the call have signed the pledge, so 36% haven't, so an opportunity there to do it. We'll share the link. Have you used it in any way? 43% said yes, which I think is pretty good considering how new it is, and 57% say no, they haven't used it. And yeah, I mean, 96% of people say today has been useful. I don't. One person said it hasn't, but I'm sorry. If you want to get in touch and find out how we can be of more help to you, then we are all ears, because we want this to be a positive experience for everybody. I'll just end that poll right now and share the results. But yeah, I guess I know there's another question from Ciara. I will follow up on that and see if we can get an answer to you. But no, I really appreciate everyone, Julian, Jim, Anna, Russell, all taking part in this and giving a lot of valuable experience. If you want to get in touch and find out more about the Pitch Positive Pledge, do get in touch. I'll put my LinkedIn profile in the chat, so if you want to connect with me, drop me a message, follow up with us on anything, please do so. Want to find out more about BD Matters. And just want to thank everyone and hopefully see a more positive future for pitching.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.